Well, welcome, Brian. Everybody who doesn't know Brian, although I doubt it, Brian Branch, retired CEO at the World Council of Credit Unions, but staying very active in the global movement. Welcome to the Credit Union Connection. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Great to see you, Sarah. Thanks for connecting.
Yeah, you as well. I think it's so important to think more broadly about credit unions and get that story out. So let's just start with catching up with you. What are you up to in your busy, not retirement?
Well, I'm enjoying retirement. I'm enjoying doing some things that I just never had time to do when I was racing to the airport to jump on a plane. Building a new house up north in the woods, and that's a labor of love and creativity, and taking our time to do that, and doing all kinds of crazy coursework at the university online, just filling in gaps that I've always been curious about but never had the time to pursue in any depth. So that's been a lot of fun, and spending a lot of time with my family. So they certainly made a lot of sacrifices during the years that I was out and around the world, and now it's a time for me to give something back to them.
Yeah, I totally understand that last point in particular. But let me go back a second. You're building a house. Are you doing it? How are you involved?
I don't have all the heavy equipment that you need to do a lot of that stuff. So I have a carpenter that works with us, and of course we've got to hire someone to come in with the heavy equipment to do the excavation and pour the cement. But yeah, I enjoy getting my hands involved and pounding some nails and fitting some wood together, and then realizing I did it wrong, tear it apart and put it in the firewood pile.
Yeah, I firmly believe that, especially for people who sit behind a computer most of the day, manual labor is good for the soul. I love doing that kind of stuff as well. So talk a little about, you mentioned also university. What are you doing there?
Well, it's just things that I was always curious about. I never knew anything about astronomy, so I took an astronomy course. I took an oceanography course, and my wife and I took some courses at the university together on U.S. election systems to try to understand that better. A lot of history courses online, and I spent an hour, 2 hours a day doing this stuff, and for example, one course I did was South American archaeology. So all these places I traveled to over the years, and I would see these ruins and hear about this history. It was finally a time when I could sit down and go back and understand what that was all about.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, I love learning. I would be a professional student if I could, honestly. But you're like you were saying, flying here and there, and you had work to do, obviously. And I think it's great that you're now getting a chance to actually understand and appreciate and enjoy, all those things that you saw and maybe didn't have time to before. That's great. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about, I know, obviously the Russian invasion of the Ukraine has been top of mind for many Americans, but particularly in the Ukrainian movement, I know folks like Bruce Folk at American Heritage and others have been involved in helping deal with the refugees. And if you could talk a little bit about what's going on in that region right now as it pertains to credit unions and humanity as a whole.
Sure. Well, for me, the global credit union system was always a community, and it was always about relationships, not just with the U.S. to another country, but countries connecting with each other. And so when Russia invaded Ukraine, I certainly heard from the Ukrainians, but the Poles reached out to me as well. And for them, this is very personal. Great sense of shared history with Ukrainians, fighting for democracy in the 1980s to come out from under the Soviet system. And they have lots of family in Ukraine, And so, and of course, those borders have moved over time. So a lot of the land in Ukraine used to be part Poland, and people have a lot of ties there still. So at the time, there's a large number of refugees coming into Poland from Ukraine. And they were very, very committed to receiving these refugees into their homes and putting nobody in a refugee camp. Well, as we looked at this, and we saw the tremendous generosity of the Polish communities in providing relief supplies, but then starting to struggle with where to put these people. And, you know, the Polish Ukrainians are all about responding to their community demands. So the communities are trying to find ways to integrate these refugees so that it doesn't become a strain on the communities, and they can continue to provide this kind of reception. And we talked about what Ukrainians can do to help with this issue. And we met with the Secretary of State of Poland, and he said, we need ambulances. We need ambulances to send into Ukraine and bring pregnant mothers and sick children and wounded or ill people, elderly people out to Polish hospitals. And so we worked with these folk in focusing on raising funds to purchase ambulances. And the Poles would buy used ambulances in Western Europe, refurbish them, make sure they're meet technical specifications, send them into Ukraine to pull people out to Polish hospitals. But at the same time, we're looking at the number of refugees approaching 3.5 million, 4 million people in a country of 70 million people. So that's a big increase in population. And in some cities where the refugees would cluster, that's a 20% increase in their city population. So the Ukrainians focused on how to help these people that are going to come to Poland and stay there because it's not safe to go back to Ukraine. They don't want to go far because their men, their husbands, their fathers are still there fighting. They're largely young women with small children. And so when we talked to the refugees, what they were looking for was a stable place to live and a place to put their kids in school. So we worked with the Ukrainians to start providing small grants to help these families move into rental housing where their kids would have access to school. And they would move in 2 or 3 families together so that while one mother was working, the others could help watch over the kids. And this is good for the communities because it gave them it gave them more economic integration of the refugees coming into the community and helped the refugees move to a point where they could sustain themselves quickly and not depend on community relief. It was good for the refugees because they wanted to work and they wanted to generate income and start saving again and be prepared for that day when they do go back to Ukraine. So we would set them up with an account in the credit union and give them a small grant through their credit union and give them a place where they could save. And eventually, as they have a greater history of stability, they would be able to access credit. So it's a good solution for everybody all around. And of course, the scale of the challenge is tremendous. So now we have, as this initiative has grown, we've started providing not just the ambulances, but some support to some of the GYN clinics in Ukraine. And the Poles have started setting up OB/GYN clinics in Poland, again, to help support the various needs of these young women in their communities. So we've tried to help support them with donations and medical supplies for those clinics. And frankly, right now, winter is coming. And so the stories that we hear coming out of Ukraine are just horrendous. And so now we're starting to provide generators and acquire generators, send them into Ukraine to help people deal with the fact that the I think at this point, 45% of the electrical grid system in Ukraine has been destroyed by the Russians. And it's part of their strategy to try to get the Ukrainians to submit.
Right. And, attacking infrastructure like that it's obvious, but it's also something that if you're not a warring country, it's not something you think about, right? So, I mean, there are so many different moving parts that you've been talking about. How do you all bring that all together? Because gynecologists and obstetricians is not something necessarily you think about, but obviously a high need there. So how do you gather all that information and decide what's what?
I've had a lot of people approach me and say, can we help with this or that? And frankly, we try to stay pretty focused on what the refugees and what the communities are telling us they need. And so when we talked with the Polish government, they said ambulances. So with Bruce, we focused on ambulances. When we talked with the refugees, they said housing, access to medical services, and so and education for the kids. And so that's why we focused on that. We try to keep it pretty focused within those areas. But again, we're trying to stay focused on what we're hearing from those people themselves that are affected about what they want, what their priorities are. And it's pretty hard not to find a way that Creighton's are relevant. You can always find a way that Creighton's are relevant to the needs of their communities. But we always think, okay, what's the value added or what's the uniqueness that Creighton's bring to this table?
Yeah, and speaking to that too, what do you feel like? I mean, obviously this experience is bringing to bear exactly the relevance of the Ukrainian community to their communities. What do you think that, Ukrainians, the US, around the world can bring back from that, can learn from that lesson too?
I think, I think we've always seen anywhere that anytime there's a crisis or a challenge and Creighton's help their communities or they help their members get through that challenge, because any geopolitical issue has its impact at the community level. That generates a tremendous loyalty on the part of the members of the Creighton. They remember that the Creighton helped them through that crisis. And the word gets out, you see a pretty dramatic membership increase after going through such an experience. Well, we can't have a crisis every day, right? But the basic principle, I think the Creighton's are tuned to, as opposed to an institution which is focused on returning stock value to its owners, is how to help their members cope with the challenges they have. And so you can find those kinds of challenges, those kinds of objectives for your membership in most any community, at most any point in their life. And people go through different transition challenges in their life. So understanding those and responding to those has always been a tremendous opportunity that differentiates great units.
Yeah, and that's the important thing too. Those are opportunities to differentiate, not take advantage of a situation that others
Exactly.
may do, and show your support. And there's always, even if it's not a large, even community geopolitical crisis like Russia, Ukraine, people are in crisis every day. And so, recognize that during the quote unquote down times, is important as well. And so, but getting back more specifically, again, to the Polish situation, what are the ongoing efforts there? I know you're continuing to fundraise through Via Stella, I believe it's called now. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, as we began this work, we wanted an ability for credit unions to contribute directly to credit unions without going through a third party, where there would be overhead costs and administrative costs. And so, so we worked with created a credit union foundation in Poland, as you mentioned, called Via Stella, completely owned and run by the Polish credit unions, and set up vehicles by which either by wires or by PayPal, with PayPal portal, people and institutions could contribute directly to that foundation. And then the CEO of the Polish Credit Union League provides a report on a regular basis. What are we doing? What are the challenges? How are we responding to those? And how are we spending the money that's coming in? We track it pretty carefully. For example, those that have said we want our money to go to ambulances, that money goes to purchase ambulances. And then others that provide contributions for what's the strategic priority. You know, we let them know this is what we're spending on children's education and rental grants and medical services. But at this point, we're still fairly small player, but we're still trying to focus on what do we hear as the specific needs. For the polls, as I mentioned, this is very top of mind. This is what they wake up and face every morning. But anyway, we have a small number of folks who provide support to the Via Stella Foundation. I serve as a chair on the program board of the foundation. Sue Mitchell is with us on that board. Bogdan Chmielski is on that board. Marshall Boutwell is also on that board. The people that have a long history of interaction with the Polish credit unions. And that's important because we need to be able to assure them this is what the audience is contributing needs to hear. You know, at this point, priorities are dealing with the winter coming. So we're planning to pretty careful about who we reach out to. We don't want to be a nuisance. You know, one of the big questions I know that you've asked me before is, why should folks in the U.S. really care? For the polls, this is this is very threatening to them, and so they've often said to me, we're seeing the true face of the Russian government, and they say the Ukrainians are fighting for our democracy. We have to support them. Well, that may be a little more abstract for us on this side of the Atlantic, but it's been very striking to me the extent to which our global economy is intertwined. And so what's going on in Ukraine, it certainly has an impact on what we're seeing with prices of food, of gas prices, and frankly, the cyber intrusions that we see here in the U.S. as well. And so,
yeah, I've been reading about wheat shortages and things like that, because apparently that is a very large crop in that region. And so that, I think that's one of the things, like you said, it's kind of abstract and people don't necessarily understand why it matters to their credit union. But as their members, here in the US, as their members see the gas prices go up, as their members see the food prices go up, or even shortages, right? Yeah, it really emphasizes the importance of the global movement.
So we're very much impacted with in our economic life by these economic ties. The other thing that has really struck me over the last few months is how many people have reached out to me because they're part of a Ukrainian or a Polish diaspora, or other parts of Eastern Europe. So people remember family ties that go back generations.
Mm-hmm. And so if we could step back a little bit, I guess, just generally speaking globally, why is the credit union community so important? I mean, 1 billion members around the world, in the US, honestly, is a small part of that. But why is it so important that the credit union community think globally as a community?
Yeah. What The U.S. Creighton system has always been and always will be the largest leader in the Creighton world. So around the world, other Creighton systems look to the U.S. For models, for insights, technology, services, strategic foresight. And so I think it's still important that the U.S. provide that leadership, not just in terms of how we operate our financial institution with financial policies and respond to regulation, but also the kind of community leadership that we provide. And Creighton's do that every day in their own communities. And I go back to one of my earlier comments, the Creighton system around the world is still very much a community. And so not only do we see the US Creightonans providing some support to the Polish Creightonans, the Ukrainian Creightonans, we see other Creighton systems around the world looking for ways that they can engage and support what's happening as well. And it's you find people in other countries very cognizant that today we're talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, a few months ago, we were talking about a different crisis in a different part of the world. In a few months, we're also going to be talking about another challenge in another part of the world. And so the Creighton system as a group, as I've worked with it over years, has always been a community that looks to, who's having challenges and how can our experience, our lessons be relevant to those folks, and how can we support them either in material or in sort of a teamwork sense of connection as well. One of the things I found with Ukrainians since 2014, I was in Kiev when the Russians invaded Crimea, but one of the things I've always found is they're trying to fight a sense of isolation. And so they've always been very thirsty for that sense that they're part of a wider global Creighton system. They've got other Creighton systems that step in and provide them with a sense of connection and support, materially or morally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So any last thoughts you want to share? Tell people how they can contribute if they choose to. Where's the information there?
Well, the website's very easy to find. If you do a Google search on Via Stella Foundation, and it's in Poland. And then it provides the bank wire information right there on the website. And then there's also a PayPal portal, so that you can use a PayPal account or a credit card account to provide support directly to the Via Stella Foundation. And we're happy to, as I mentioned, Rafal provides an update letter on a regular basis. We do put his letters on the underground website that Sue Mitchell maintains, so one can also find information on the underground website and access to that Via Stella portal as well. It's very easy to find, and we're just happy to provide information. We want to be very transparent about what's happening and how the money is used to support the work that the Poles are doing.
Who is contributing? Is it individuals? Is it companies? Is it credit unions? Is it all the above? How's that working out?
Today, largely, it's been credit unions, and so it was, as I mentioned before, to us it was important that we could set up a credit union to credit union channel, so credit unions would know that their money was going to credit unions to be used completely and directly in that kind of response. We've had a small number of individuals that have contributed, and they're very appreciated. And that's why we set up that PayPal portal. We've had a couple, but not a lot of non-credit union businesses, and that's something that we've talked about exploring a little bit more.
Yeah, getting those community partners, whether it's potentially business partners or the community organizations that credit unions work with as well. Yeah, that'd be great to get them involved, exponentially expand, the relationships there. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brian. I appreciate it. We'll include the links in the in the comments, and hopefully get the word out there more. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sarah. And it was great seeing you. And if you'll be at GAC, I hope to see you there.
I will be there.